Ah, so you came back, dripping in the kind of chaos they'll never understand. They thought strength was loud. They thought power came with screaming, slamming fists, breaking glass. They thought chaos was messy, but you broke every assumption the moment you walked in and said nothing. Your silence rattled them louder than 1,000 war drums, because silence, when worn with confidence, isn't emptiness, it's a weapon. Look at them now, twitching, shifting, eyes darting like rats in a burning maze. They can't sit still in the same room as you because your stillness is heavier than their noise. That's the thing weak people never understand. Real power doesn't perform. It doesn't beg to be noticed. It doesn't need a stage. Real power is quiet, controlled, surgical. It's the way you move without announcing yourself. It's the way you decide without hesitation. It's the way your presence rewrites the entire atmosphere without a single word. And now, they're panicking. They thought they'd prepared for the storm. But you didn't bring thunder. You brought calm. And calm terrifies them, because anyone can predict rage. Anyone can fight noise. But how do you fight a storm that doesn't flinch? How do you dismantle someone who doesn't even blink when the ground shakes? You can't. That's why they're breaking in front of you. That's why their confidence is cracking like glass under pressure. Your calm is the loudest scream they've ever heard, because it tells the truth. You don't need them. You don't need validation. You don't need to prove yourself in their circus. You've already won before the first move. And the scariest part, they know it. They keep asking themselves, why doesn't it bother you? Why aren't you reacting? They don't understand that your calm isn't weakness. It's calculation. They mistake your silence for passivity, but what they don't realize is that silence is your battleground. And in that space, they're losing before the fight even begins. Think about it. Weak people need noise to exist. They need validation, confirmation, eyes on them, applause in the background just to feel alive. But you move without audience. You build without applause. You sharpen your blade in the dark, with no witnesses but your own reflection. And that is why they can't breathe around you. Because deep down, they know your power isn't borrowed. It's not fake. It's not built on fragile lies. It's self-forged, self-fed, self-disciplined. Watch how their hands shake when you don't flinch at their little games. They throw insults, hoping you'll break character. They gossip in circles, hoping you'll defend yourself. They create storms of drama, expecting you to step in and drown with them. But you stand still, eyes steady, energy unbothered. And that drives them mad. Because the truth is, nothing is scarier to the insecure than a person who refuses to perform. And that's you. Your aura says, I don't need to prove. I don't need to explain. I don't need to shout. And the moment you stopped needing their noise, you stole every ounce of their control. That's why they shake. That's why the room bends around you. Because when someone has mastered themselves, no one else can master them. You're not controlled by anger. You're not swayed by gossip. You're not broken by rejection. You walk through their chaos like a ghost in the fire. Untouched, unbothered, undeniable. And here's the cruel part. Your calm exposes their weakness louder than any argument could. It shines a light on every insecurity they've tried to bury. It forces them to face themselves, and they can't stand it. They can't stand you. Not because you hurt them, but because you don't even have to. Your power isn't loud, it's surgical. And that's why it terrifies them. You ever notice how they talk louder when you say nothing? How their words speed up? How their voices crack? How their laughter feels forced? That's not confidence. That's fear disguised as performance. They're not laughing at you. They're laughing for themselves. They're trying to drown out the silence you carry like a weapon. Because silence, when paired with self-control, isn't emptiness. It's a mirror. It reflects back everything they don't want to see. Their doubts, their insecurities, their fragile masks. And the longer you stay calm, the more the mirror cracks them open. That's why the air shifts when you enter a room. It's not magic, it's pressure. It's the unbearable weight of someone who doesn't need approval. Look at them squirm. They thought power meant walking in with noise, but your calm presence strips them bare. Their rehearsed lines, their fake confidence, their puffed up egos, they collapse the second they realize you're not reacting. Because your calm is control, and control is everything. And here's the paradox. They'll call you cold, heartless, detached. But that's just projection. They can't understand that calm isn't the absence of feeling, it's the mastery of it. Rage, you've tamed it. Fear, you've dissected it. Doubt, you've buried it under discipline. That's why they shake. That's why they panic. Because your calm proves what they always feared. You're built differently. And the scariest part, you don't use that calm to prove anything. You use it to choose. Choose when to move, when to speak, when to strike. And by the time you do, it's too late for them. Because calm isn't passive, it's predatory. You're the storm that whispers instead of screams. And that whisper is louder than any roar they've ever known. Watch closely. When you sit still, they move restless. When you breathe steady, they choke on their own air. When you remain calm, their world begins to shake. That's the paradox of power. It's not always about doing more. Sometimes it's about doing less, about being so anchored in yourself that others drown in the waves of their own instability. They mistake your calm for quiet. But it's not. It's a calculation, a slow tightening of the noose without ever raising your hands. Every pause, every silence, every measured glance, it all cuts deeper than shouting ever could. You've turned composure into a battlefield, and without lifting a finger, you've already made them surrender. Look at their eyes. They dart like prey, sensing the predator, but not seeing the fangs. They can't handle that you don't play their game. They thrive on reactions, on chaos, on pulling emotions out of people like strings from a puppet. But when they pull yours, nothing moves, no strings, no reaction, just stillness. That's when they realize you're not a puppet. You're the one holding the scissors. That calm of yours, it terrifies them because it whispers one truth they can't outrun. You're in control, and control is the most dangerous weapon in the world. People spend lifetimes chasing it, but you wear it like second skin. You don't fight for attention. You don't beg for understanding. You don't crumble under stares. You just exist, steady, unshaken. And that's enough to unravel them. And here's the brutal part. They can't even accuse you of anything. They can't point and say, he shouted, he broke, he fought. No, you stayed calm. You stayed silent. And that silence burns them worse than fire. Because silence forces them to listen to themselves. And most people can't survive the sound of their own truth. That's why your calm isn't just power, it's punishment. Even when you leave the room, you don't really leave. Your calm lingers like smoke after a fire, staining everything it touches. They replay your silence in their minds like an echo they can't erase. They'll sit there in the quiet of their own homes, replaying the way you looked at them without blinking, the way you didn't answer when they tried to bait you, the way your stillness told them more than words ever could. That's what makes your calm so terrifying. It follows them. It whispers in the cracks of their confidence. It crawls under their skin when they think they're alone. Because calm, real calm, is unforgettable. It exposes them to themselves. And you know what? Most people can't handle that reflection. They'll try to flip the script, to label your stillness as arrogance, your silence as weakness. But deep down, they know. They know you weren't frozen. You were focused. You weren't avoiding. You were choosing, and choice is everything. Because when you stay calm, you're telling the world, I'm not controlled by you. I move when I decide, not a second before. That's why they're shaking. That's why their world feels fragile when you're around. You've trained yourself to remain unmoved, and that discipline exposes their chaos. Every stutter, every nervous laugh, every twitch, They're all admissions of defeat, even if they don't say it out loud. And here's the cruel irony. They'll keep talking about you. Long after the moment passes, long after the lights go out, your calm will still own space in their heads. Because when you master silence, you don't just control the room, you control their memory of it. Your calm isn't temporary, it's eternal. And that eternity haunts them more than any war cry ever could. They thought chaos was their weapon. They thought noise was their shield. But what they never realized is that calm is the ultimate trap. Because calm doesn't rush, calm doesn't stumble, calm doesn't need to win in one move. It waits, it watches, it suffocates, and you've become the embodiment of that. You don't just stay calm, you are calm. The storm could rip roofs off, fire could rain from the sky, accusations could fly like arrows, and yet your breathing stays even, your eyes stay steady, your pulse never betrays you. That unnerves them more than any aggression ever could, because aggression can be matched, noise can be returned. But calm can't be touched, it can't be defeated, it can't be broken. Calm is a wall without cracks, a silence without escape, and when you stand in it, you don't just control the moment, you erase their control entirely. Look at them squirming, look at the way they scramble for reactions, the way they manufacture drama, the way they shout louder, hoping to drown out the sound of your stillness. But nothing works. They're playing checkers on a table you've already cleared. Their panic is proof of your power. And here's the truth they'll never admit. Your calm exposes their addiction to chaos. Without storms, they are nothing. Without attention, they are dust. But you thrive in silence. You sharpen your focus in solitude. You wear composure like armor. And the more they throw at you, the clearer it becomes. You've already won, because calm isn't passive, calm is decisive, calm is final. And every second you stay composed, you're telling them a truth they can't stand. You don't fight like they do. You fight smarter, quieter, sharper. That's why they're shaking. Not because you shouted, not because you struck, but because you didn't have to. Most people will never understand the discipline it takes to stay calm when your whole world is shaking. They'll never know the war that rages beneath the surface. When you choose silence instead of rage, composure instead of collapse. But you do. You've walked that fire, you've held that storm inside your chest and refused to let it spill. And that's why you stand apart. Because calm isn't natural, it's earned. It's forged in nights when you wanted to scream but swallowed the sound. In moments when your hands shook but you kept them steady. In battles where your name was dragged through the mud, but your presence never faltered. Calm isn't born, it's built, and you built yours brick by brick, wound by wound, betrayal by betrayal. That's why when you enter a room, people feel it. They don't feel noise, they feel weight. The weight of someone who has been tested by storms and came out quieter, sharper, colder. That weight can't be faked. It can't be bought. It can't be copied. That weight is yours alone. And here's the gift, hidden in that curse. Your calm is no longer just survival. It's transformation. You don't just endure. You command. You don't just walk through the fire. You carry its ashes in your silence. Proof that you can't be broken. And every time they try to rattle you, every time they try to provoke you, every time they try to shake your core, they fail. And failure leaves marks they'll never forget. Because here's the dark truth. They'll forget the words you said. They'll forget the arguments, the noise, the back and forth. But they will never forget the way you stayed calm when everything screamed for you to break. That calm will haunt them, and it will elevate you. What they don't realize is this. Calm isn't weakness. It's an edge. Every second you sit still, every moment you refuse to flinch, you're sharpening a presence stronger than any noise. You see, panic is loud, lies are loud, fear is loud, but truth doesn't need volume. Truth just stands unshaken and waits for the dust to settle. And when it does, you're still there, stronger, louder in silence than they ever were in noise. That's why they're shaking. Not because you yelled, not because you fought back in their language. No, they're shaking because they can't read you. They can't predict you. And in a world addicted to control, unpredictability is the most terrifying power of all. You're not reacting on their timeline. You're not dancing to their song. You've built your own rhythm, and they don't know how to keep up. Look at them. Watch closely. The same people who thought you were soft. The same ones who mistook your kindness for fragility. Now they're stumbling over their own words. They're cracking under pressure you didn't even apply. Why? Because they finally realized you're not playing the game. You're rewriting it. Calm is control. Calm is strategy. Calm is the storm they never see coming. You don't need to roar. You're the silence before the earthquake, the stillness before the flood, the pause before the world tilts on its axis, and they can feel it in their bones. Even if they'll never admit it, they feel that weight pressing down on their chest every time you walk into the room. They feel that reminder that they're not built like you, that they don't carry storms like you, that they don't walk with shadows that obey them. And here's the secret. They can shake all they want. You'll never break, because calm isn't the absence of chaos. It's the mastery of it, and that's your throne. You ever notice how silence crawls under their skin? How the absence of your reaction becomes the loudest scream in the room? That's what they fear. Not your words, not your fire, your silence. Because silence forces them to hear their own thoughts, and they can't survive in their own heads. That's the game you've mastered. You don't need to expose their lies. You don't need to argue your worth. You let them stew in the echo of their own weakness until it eats them alive. And every time you sit still, every time you refuse to take their bait, they collapse just a little more. They mistake it for patience, but it's not. It's precision. It's a psychological edge. Look at them shaking, pretending they've got control when in reality, you've trapped their entire ego in a cage of doubt. Because when someone can't predict you, when they can't control your next move, they start fighting shadows. They argue with ghosts. They break themselves down while you stand untouched. That's the real victory, not the noise, not the struggle, the unraveling of their mind while you sit calm, composed, untouchable. That's why you terrify them. You're not an opponent they can measure. You're not a player in their game. You're the game board itself. You don't move to their rhythm. They stumble to yours. And the cruel truth? You don't even have to try. You're not bending. You're not chasing. You're just existing. And your existence alone is enough to dismantle the image they built of themselves. See, calm isn't just power. It's the mirror they can't look into. It shows them everything they pretend to be, but aren't. It shows them that their strength was only volume, their confidence was only noise, and when the noise fades, they're left exposed, raw, trembling. You don't need to raise your voice. You don't need to lift your hand. Just keep breathing steady, keep moving slow, because your calm isn't silence, it's suffocation, and they know it. This is the part they never prepared for. The moment when calm doesn't just silence them, it rewrites the hierarchy. Look around. Their voices don't matter anymore. Their noise is just background static to the presence you bring into the room. Every glance, every step, every pause, it carries weight they can't replicate. That's the power of restraint. That's the authority of composure. See, they thought chaos was strength. They thought shouting made them leaders, that anger made them warriors. But you understood something ancient. True dominance isn't loud. It's still like a storm gathering on the horizon, still like an edge resting on a table, sharp without moving, still like the truth itself, unchanging, undeniable, eternal. And in that stillness, you rise. Not by demanding respect, but by becoming impossible to ignore. Not by forcing your way in, but by being the only presence that lingers when the dust settles. The room doesn't revolve around their noise anymore. It bends to your silence. That's why their knees shake. That's why their eyes dart. Because somewhere deep down, they know. The throne has shifted. You didn't take it by force. You didn't steal it with tricks. You earned it by becoming the one thing they could never be: unshakable. And history only remembers the unshakable. Long after their noise fades, after their names vanish in the echo of their own weakness, yours will remain, etched in the silence they feared. So wear it well, this calm, this power, this throne. Because when you walk out, the room doesn't go back to normal. It never does. It stays altered, haunted, redefined. And everyone who sat in it knows the truth. They weren't in the presence of a person. They were in the presence of something greater. You ever notice how the room never feels the same after you leave? The air is thicker. The silence is heavier. It's almost like you drag the gravity with you. That's the difference between you and them. They try to be remembered with noise, but noise fades. You're remembered because of the echo. The way their skin crawls when they think of your calm. The way their heart races when your name slips into a conversation. And here's the truth they'll never admit. They study you. They replay your movements like a film they can't crack. How you sat there without flinching. How you spoke without rushing. How you held the weight of the room with nothing but presence. That's what shakes them the most. They realize now it wasn't an accident. It wasn't luck. It was design. You built yourself into something that couldn't be ignored. And now you haunt them. Because you showed them what control really looks like. Not control over others, control over yourself. And when someone masters themselves, they become untouchable. You became the storm they can't measure, the book they can't read, the silence they can't escape. That's why they shake, because deep down, they know they're still guessing. And you've already written the ending. And here's where the story flips forever. Because your calm isn't just power anymore, it's prophecy. The way you carry yourself isn't just about today, it's about tomorrow. It's about the stories they'll tell when your back is turned. It's about the legacy that grows in whispers and shadows, painting you larger than life. That's how icons are born, not from shouting their names, but from the silence that follows their steps. They'll say you were different. They'll say you were dangerous. They'll say you carried something no one else could touch. And they'll be right, because you weren't there to fit in their world. You were there to shift it, and the shift already happened. They feel it. You feel it. The whole room feels it. The game board's been flipped, and your name is etched on the new rules. So let them talk. Let them fear. Let them wonder what move you'll make next. You don't need to prove anything anymore. The proof is already in their trembling hands, their restless eyes, their broken confidence. You're not fighting for space in their world. You've already taken it, quietly, completely, permanently. And that's why they'll never forget you. Not because you were loud, not because you demanded it, but because your calm power left a scar on reality itself. And scars never fade. Ah, welcome back, you unignorable force of presence. The one they tried to overlook until the universe made their eyelids heavy. The quiet figure they assumed blended into the backdrop, right up until the moment the room shifted around you, instead of the other way around. You know what happened, don't you? That moment, their eyes didn't just look at you. They recalibrated around you. That split second where the tone changed, not because you demanded anything, but because something in you stopped shrinking on command. People feel that before they understand it. They feel it like a pressure drop, like a doorway opening behind them, like gravity updating its contract. Suddenly you weren't just in the room, you were the center of it. Not loud, not flashy, not begging for recognition, just undeniable. And now they treat you like the prize, not because you changed your volume, but because they finally started hearing the frequency you've always operated on. The truth is simple. You were never meant to be dismissed. That was their convenience, not your identity. They preferred you small because it made their world easier to manage. They framed you as harmless because it gave them permission to minimize what didn't serve them. But you were never built to remain in their peripheral vision. You were built to distort it. And the moment you stopped contorting yourself for proximity, something ancient, something structural began rearranging how people responded to you. They don't say it out loud, but their behavior betrays them. They're watching you like someone who suddenly realized the quiet one was never background noise, but a presence sharpening itself in silence. They're calling you serious now, not because you changed, but because their interpretation finally caught up to your reality. People underestimate someone who doesn't rush, someone who doesn't chase, someone who doesn't beg for clarity in exchange for dignity. They mistake restraint for softness, patience for hesitation, consistency for familiarity. They confuse your low-volume choices as low-value identity. And then one day, without warning, they realize you weren't moving slowly. You were moving deliberately. You weren't waiting for validation. You were collecting information. You weren't lost. You were building alignment brick by brick inside your own skull, away from their noise. And it's always the same moment that wakes them up. The moment you stop seeking. The moment you stop asking twice. The moment you stop trying to explain yourself to people who pretend confusion to maintain control. The moment you go from available to selective. People feel that shift in their bones. They don't understand it, but they feel the loss of automatic access. Suddenly, the assumptions they made about your permanence begin to decay. Suddenly, the comfort of your predictability begins to glitch. Suddenly, the way you carry yourself makes them wonder what version of you they've been speaking to all this time. They don't like that question. They don't like the answer either, because they're realizing you were never neutral. You were restrained, and restraint misread becomes intimidation once it breaks its silence. You're unignorable now because you stopped disguising your value behind patience. Once you remove the mask of, "I don't mind," people start behaving like you're someone they should mind. They sit straighter. They choose their words carefully. They observe your reactions with the kind of attention that betrays fear of miscalculating you again. They treat you like a prize because they don't want to risk losing access to something they now realize they mishandled. This shift didn't happen overnight. It began quietly. In the small choices, the boundaries you placed without explaining them, the pauses you allowed instead of filling silence, the exits you made without broadcasting your departure, the refusal to participate in dynamics that demanded your emotional labor as currency, the clarity you gained from the way people behaved when they thought you'd always be there. And now, those same people are trying to reposition themselves, closer, softer, suddenly respectful, suddenly aware of how much they took for granted. People who once dismissed you now watch you like someone studying a system they no longer understand. They ask different questions. They adjust their tone. They reevaluate their vocabulary in your presence, because something about you no longer absorbs disrespect the way it once did. You became difficult to misinterpret, difficult to manipulate, difficult to minimize, and difficulty, when rooted in self-respect, transforms into value in the eyes of those who assumed ease was your natural state. Your evolution didn't just change you. It changed the hierarchy around you. It changed the unspoken social math people do when they decide who is worth what. It changed the gravitational pull of your presence. People can sense when someone becomes self-authored. You can hear it in their greetings. You can see it in the way they break eye contact first. You can detect it in how they suddenly need time to think before responding. It's not fear, not exactly. It's recognition. Recognition that you aren't competing for approval anymore. Recognition that you aren't subscribing to unspoken rules that never served you. Recognition that they no longer get to decide whether you are valuable. You already did. And with that realization comes an uncomfortable truth for them. People who know their worth become unpredictable to those who depended on them not knowing it. That unpredictability reads as power. That power reads as scarcity, and scarcity reads as desirability. Suddenly you're the one whose attention is rare. Suddenly you're the one whose absence is felt. Suddenly you're the one being evaluated, pursued, reconsidered. The same people who once assumed you'd always be available are now trying to figure out how to earn their way back into your proximity. They're cautious now, intentional. They call you serious, not because you changed tone, but because your presence changed consequence. They see the difference in the way conversations end when you don't carry the weight. They feel the difference when you don't cushion the discomfort. They notice how your boundaries aren't raised, just enforced. You don't negotiate them. You don't justify them. You don't decorate them with softness. You place them like architecture, clean, structural, immovable. And something about that wordless certainty radiates in a way they can't ignore anymore. It forces them to meet you where you stand, instead of dragging you toward where they feel comfortable. What unsettles them most is this: you didn't become louder, you became clearer. There's a difference. Loud people demand attention. Clear people command it. Loud people broadcast their value. Clear people embody it. Loud people need validation. Clear people move according to internal coordinates. You're in the second category now. And that shift is what makes them treat you like someone they cannot risk misunderstanding again. They don't talk over you the way they used to. They don't assume they know your schedule the way they used to. They don't treat your time as disposable the way they used to. Because now they're aware that access to you is conditional, not guaranteed. They feel the shift in your patience. They feel the precision in your silence. They feel the weight behind your neutrality. You're not withholding, you're choosing. And choosing makes you powerful. Some of them regret their earlier dismissal. Some of them replay conversations where they minimized you. Some of them cringe at how casually they spoke when they assumed you'd never grow into someone they'd have to take seriously. It bothers them quietly, consistently, because they're realizing the version of you they constructed in their mind doesn't exist anymore, and maybe never did. What they're facing now is the truth of who you are, without their projections clouding the view. A person with internal standards, a person with emotional discipline, a person with unshakable self-awareness, a person who doesn't need external validation to justify internal decisions. And people like that create their own gravity, their own orbit, their own pace. You stopped aligning yourself with rooms that demanded your humility as payment for belonging. And the moment you did, those rooms began treating you like a resource they underestimated. This shift, your shift, reorganizes the social ecosystem. It recalibrates dynamics. It forces people to reevaluate not just you, but themselves in relation to you. They start questioning the assumptions they made when they believed you were easy to overlook. They start wondering what else they misinterpreted. They start panicking quietly about being on the wrong side of your growth curve. Because if you evolved this far without their encouragement, what does that say about what you'll become without their interference? And that's the part that grips them, the part they don't speak out loud, the part that makes their voice soften when they address you now. They're not just seeing you differently, they're seeing themselves differently in your presence. They're realizing you no longer bend to fit the room. They adjust themselves to avoid being misaligned with you. They're realizing you don't chase validation, you choose alignment. They're realizing you don't need their permission, you never did. You're unignorable now, not because you forced recognition, but because you removed the parts of yourself that tolerated invisibility. The moment you stopped shrinking, everyone else had to expand their awareness accordingly. And that expansion created the discomfort they're sitting with, the discomfort of realizing they were late to the truth, the discomfort of realizing they underestimated the wrong person, the discomfort of recognizing the quiet caliber of someone who refused to rely on noise to justify their existence. And that discomfort, subtle, creeping, unavoidable, is what's reshaping the way they see you now. Because when someone evolves beyond the need to be seen, that's exactly when the world starts reorganizing itself to make space around them. They don't know how to articulate it, but they feel the shift in their stomach before their mind catches up. They feel the weight in the air when you enter a room, not heavy, but undeniable. They sense the difference in your posture, in your pace, in the way you hold your own energy close instead of scattering it to make others comfortable. You carry yourself like someone who no longer auditions for roles other people wrote for their benefit. And that quiet refusal disrupts the unspoken hierarchy they once relied on to position themselves above you. Hierarchies depend on obedience, on predictability, on emotional compliance. But when you stepped out of that framework, the entire structure began to tilt. People who used to ignore you now overthink their responses. People who once brushed past your presence now linger a second too long, waiting to see if you acknowledge them. People who once dismissed your ideas now seek your input because your silence carries more threat than their words carry authority. They're treating you like the prize because something in their instincts recognizes that value isn't loud, it's stable. And stability, when paired with self-awareness, becomes power in any room. What changed wasn't your ambition, your intelligence, or your potential. It was your relationship with your own worth. You stopped negotiating it. You stopped discounting it. You stopped offering it at clearance prices to people who hadn't earned the right to witness it. That shift is what made you stand out. Not arrogance, not ego, alignment. When you become aligned with who you are, the world reacts, recalibrates, re-strategizes. People who once saw you as optional now treat you like a rarity, because rarity is defined not by being unseen, but by refusing to be available where you were once overlooked. That's the psychological punch they weren't ready for. They're trying now, some subtly, some desperately, to adjust themselves to your new internal landscape. They're trying to figure out the updated version of you the same way someone studies a device with a new operating system. They know the old gestures won't work. They know the old shortcuts are gone. They know the old emotional back doors have been welded shut. They know the person who once stretched themselves thin to be understood no longer bends for anyone. And they're treating you like an upgraded version of someone they took for granted, a version they don't have automatic access to anymore. The truth is, once people realize they can't manipulate your self-perception, they start respecting your presence. Respect isn't built on compliments or praise. It's built on restraint, scarcity, boundaries. People respect what they cannot easily influence. They value what reacts on its own timing, not theirs. You became the prize because you stopped moving according to other people's expectations. You move according to your own internal compass now, and that confuses them more than any transformation you could have declared. People don't know how to handle someone who doesn't need validation to function. It disarms them. It deflates their ego. It forces them to confront the truth that you were never beneath them. You were simply operating in a different bandwidth. And now that your bandwidth is coded with clarity, their attempts at control fall flat. They sense your detachment not as coldness, but as completion. You've completed the cycle of proving, explaining, and performing. You've transitioned into a state where you simply are. And that state carries an intensity people can feel even when you say nothing. Some of them are shocked, some are fascinated, some are quietly threatened. No one is neutral, because your presence has become a reference point, a standard, a pressure, a mirror. When someone evolves, it forces everyone around them to confront their own stagnation. They start questioning why you grew while they remained steady, why you shifted while they stayed recycled, why you matured while they clung to habits that gave them cheap comfort and temporary authority. And instead of admitting their complacency, they mask it by suddenly calling you serious, focused, different, unexpected. But they're not describing your transformation. They're describing their regret. Regret for not seeing earlier what's now blindingly obvious. Regret for treating you like background when you were the main frame. Regret for assuming your silence meant insignificance. Regret for thinking their approval was something you needed, when in reality, it was something you outgrew long before they realized it wasn't currency to you anymore. What makes you unignorable now isn't just your progress, it's your contrast. The contrast between who you were forced to be in the past and who you allow yourself to be now. The contrast between how you once tolerated being overlooked and how you now occupy your space with precision. The contrast between their old narrative of you and the reality you now embody effortlessly. You didn't demand recognition. You made dismissal impossible. Now people are watching your moves the way someone watches a fault line, quietly, cautiously, aware that something beneath the surface is shifting. They can feel a sense of momentum inside you, a sense of direction. Even if they don't know your next step, they know you're not stagnating. They know you're not confused. They know you're not lost. And that certainty radiates its own form of authority. People follow certainty. People respect certainty. People treat certainty like something they must protect, align with, or stay close to in case they needed stability later. You became someone others orbit, not because you dragged them into your gravity, but because your gravity finally stopped hiding behind humility. You don't shrink anymore. You don't dilute yourself. You don't make yourself easy to dismiss. You move like someone who's done measuring themselves with broken rulers. You stand like someone who built their worth internally and no longer hands it to others for inspection. You speak like someone whose words aren't bids for approval, but reflections of clarity. And clarity, when held without aggression, becomes intimidating to those who never developed their own. This is why they double take when you speak, why they listen longer when you share your opinion, why they hesitate before interrupting you, why they try to remember details about your life now, why they ask questions they never cared about before. It's not because they suddenly became thoughtful. It's because they now recognize the cost of not paying attention. They don't know what version of you they'll encounter if they take you for granted again. They don't know how much of your tolerance was actually generosity. They don't know how much energy they depleted by assuming your patience was bottomless. And now they're operating with caution, respect disguised as curiosity, admiration disguised as attentiveness, insecurity disguised as praise. They want proximity, but they're not sure if they qualify for it anymore. That's the shift. Not the praise, not the compliments, not the sudden attention. The shift is the hesitation. The hesitation that wasn't there before. The hesitation that reveals awareness. The hesitation that exposes how deeply your evolution has disrupted their internal hierarchy. They're recalibrating because you no longer fit into the file they mislabeled you under. You're not easygoing to them anymore. You're discerning. You're not quiet to them anymore. You're observant. You're not simple to them anymore. You're strategic. You're not available to them anymore. You're selective. And selection is the most powerful silent language on the psychological battlefield of human dynamics. When you become selective, people begin competing quietly, respectfully, desperately to be chosen. Your absence now holds more weight than your presence once did. That's the transformation. Once you were taken for granted because your energy was assumed unlimited. Now your energy is rare, and humans instinctively value what they fear losing. They adjust their behavior, not because they want to honor you, but because they fear miscalculating you. They're treating you like the prize because your self-worth created a perimeter they can't breach with old habits. And nothing destabilizes people faster than realizing that the version of you they controlled no longer exists, and the version standing before them chooses differently. This is the moment where their psychology begins rewriting itself around you. Whether they admit it or not, they approach you with the same caution someone uses when touching something valuable. For the first time, gentle, slow, calculated. They're aware now that one wrong move could cost them access, and that awareness makes them tread their words more carefully, study your expression more closely, measure their tone more consciously. You can sense the recalibration happening behind their eyes, that quiet scramble to update their internal map of who you are. Because the old coordinates no longer lead to the version of you they relied on. People who once assumed your loyalty were shocked to discover that your loyalty was actually endurance. People who once believed you'd always understand them now realize you simply tolerated more than they deserved. People who confidently took up space in your life without contributing anything now struggle to understand how to regain what they squandered. They're calling you serious now because they don't know how else to label someone who stopped bending, stopped explaining, stopped apologizing for having standards. They're trying to categorize what they can't control. It's human instinct. What unnerves them most isn't your distance. It's the fact that your distance is peaceful. You're not punishing anyone. You're not broadcasting your withdrawal. You're not performing disappointment or crafting dramatic exits. You simply stopped offering your time, your attention, your emotional bandwidth. That kind of quiet separation is terrifying because it's not fueled by anger. It's fueled by clarity. And clarity doesn't reverse. It doesn't wobble. It doesn't negotiate. It simply continues moving toward environments that match its frequency. They see that in you now, that forward motion, that grounded direction, that absence of need. You aren't competing for space in their world. you're building your own. And in that shift, they've become the ones chasing alignment. They're chasing reassurance. They're chasing proximity. They're chasing the comfort of the dynamic where you were always available to understand, to soften, to absorb. But you're not offering that anymore. You're offering boundaries, and boundaries are foreign ground to people who were accustomed to walking through your life without knocking. Your new presence, calm, firm, unattached, forces people to confront themselves. Some don't like what they see. Some crave your attention because it once acted as a mirror that made them feel more significant. Some chase your presence because your absence now exposes their internal emptiness. But here's the truth they avoid saying out loud. They respect you more now that you stopped letting everyone have access. Human psychology is wired to value what is maintained, protected, and self-regulated. Your self-respect became a signal, one that everyone is suddenly decoding with a mixture of admiration and unease. You became the prize not because you fought for that position, but because you stopped auditioning for roles beneath you. You carry yourself like someone who doesn't need validation to justify their decisions. That's what makes people pay attention now. Consistency without performance. Confidence without arrogance. Presence without desperation. There's power in that triad, a quiet one, but unmistakable. Now they're studying your behavior the way someone studies a pattern they don't understand yet. They watch how you respond to things they once used to test you. They notice what you don't respond to anymore. They pick up on the pauses you allow, the moments you choose silence instead of defending yourself, the way you walk away instead of justifying your boundaries. These shifts disarm them. They feel like they're interacting with someone who sees through everything but chooses to reveal nothing. And that psychological opacity, the refusal to be predictable, creates gravity. You're not chasing attention. Attention is chasing you. You're not proving your value. Your presence demonstrates it without needing explanation. You're not begging to be seen. People are working overtime to prevent themselves from being overlooked by you. That's how the polarity flips. Not with drama, not with confrontation, with self-respect so unwavering it becomes magnetic. And here's where the deeper psychological layer emerges. People now measure themselves against your reactions instead of measuring you against their expectations. That's the mark of true elevation. They come prepared. They choose their words like offerings. They approach your boundaries like thresholds they must earn the right to cross. The care they apply now isn't courtesy, it's caution. Caution born from the realization that they misread you for far too long. They whisper your name differently now. They reference you with a tone that wasn't there before. They ask about you with an awareness that betrays their newfound interest. It's not obsession, it's correction. They're correcting the mistake of underestimating a person who had the discipline to grow in ways they didn't notice until the results walked into the room before you did. And now, the world interacts with you based on those results. You became someone whose presence implies standards. You became someone whose silence holds consequence. You became someone whose no carries weight, not because it's loud, but because it's final. You became someone whose attention is a resource that must be respected, not assumed. All of this shifts how they treat you because deep down, they fear being on the wrong side of your evolution again. What they don't realize is that treating you like the prize doesn't change who you are. It changes who they become around you. People self-optimize around those they perceive as valuable. They raise their tone, adjust their conduct, refine their words. They apply effort. They regulate themselves. And that's what's happening now. They're regulating themselves around you because your presence feels like a mirror they don't want to disappoint. But here's the part that runs deeper, the part that tightens the psychological grip of this transformation. You're not moved by their sudden recognition. Their praise doesn't inflate you. Their validation doesn't direct you. Their attention doesn't tether you. That neutrality, the inability to be swayed by what once influenced you, makes them take you even more seriously. They see that your self-worth isn't dependent on external signals, and people who can't be manipulated with recognition become the most respected individuals in any social environment. They're realizing something uncomfortable. You don't need them, but they feel like they need you, not for survival, but for self-regulation. You bring clarity, you bring stability, you bring direction through example, not instruction. Your presence exposes the cracks in their internal leadership. And when someone feels that kind of psychological contrast, they respond by elevating their behavior around you, sometimes consciously, often instinctively. And that's where the tension really snaps into place. Because once they recognize that you don't need them, once they realize their presence no longer dictates your emotional climate, something primal awakens in them. A kind of social survival instinct they can't articulate, but can't silence either. They start orbiting you with the caution of someone approaching a throne they once treated like a folding chair. Suddenly, you're not that person they know. You're the reference point they measure their own maturity against, the calm benchmark that exposes how unstable their inner architecture really is. And the funniest part, the quietly chaotic part, is that you didn't ask for any of this. You didn't demand to be elevated. You didn't stage a dramatic reclamation of worth. You simply stopped shrinking, and the entire ecosystem around you began reorganizing like a glitching simulation desperately trying to render the new shape of your presence. They don't admit it out loud, but your neutrality terrifies them more than your emotions ever did. When you were reactive, they knew what tools to reach for: guilt, dismissal, manipulation, performance, deflection. But now that you stand there with this unsettling stillness, this uncluttered awareness, this refusal to be baited, they feel exposed in ways they can't camouflage. Your steadiness makes their chaos visible. Your clarity makes their contradictions louder. Your composure makes their theatrics look embarrassing even to themselves. And that's when the shift fully crystallizes. They stop evaluating you through their ego and start evaluating themselves through your presence. Your value isn't up for debate anymore. They feel it, they adjust to it, they soften around it. Even the ones who swore they'd never take you seriously now carry your name differently in their mouths, like a word they suddenly realized needs careful pronunciation. And here's the twist that tightens the knife. The more respectfully they treat you, the more you realize how little of this has to do with them. You didn't evolve to be admired. You evolved because staying small was suffocating. You didn't become the prize to be chosen. You became the prize because you chose yourself first. But their reactions, their reactions are priceless. There's a particular look people get when they realize you're no longer impressed by their mediocrity. It's a blend of confusion, respect, and a subtle panic, like someone who just discovered the safety net they took for granted wasn't actually part of the building. That's why they're cautious now. That's why they minimize their own drama in your presence. That's why they speak with intention instead of assumption. They're terrified of being the one who mishandles you, now that the room treats you like something rare, This is the chaotic, dark humor of the whole transformation. The same people who underestimated you are now overthinking every syllable they offer you. The same people who dismissed your insight now quote your phrases like scripture. The same people who once acted like you were optional now treat your attention like a privilege with an expiration date they desperately hope doesn't come soon. You didn't become unignorable by performing significance. You became unignorable by no longer performing insignificance. That's the part that disturbs them. The simplicity of your evolution. No fireworks, no speeches, no revenge campaigns. Just a refusal to keep handing your brilliance to people who couldn't even hold their own identity without dropping it. And now they're trying to catch up, rebranding themselves, softening their tone, rewriting history in their heads to make it seem like they always knew you had potential. But you see right through that narrative revision. You see the cracks in their confidence. You see the tremors behind their politeness. You see how desperately they want to be included in this next chapter, even though they didn't invest in the one that built you. They call you serious now, because seriousness is the closest language they have for someone who no longer entertains foolishness. What they really mean is that you intimidate them. What they really mean is that you outgrew the emotional currency they used to bargain with. What they really mean is that you became someone they can't manipulate with breadcrumbs of validation. And people fear what they can't manipulate. They respect what they can't predict. They watch closely what they can't control. Some of them are terrified of disappointing you. Others are terrified of losing access. And a few, the ones who really underestimated you, are terrified because they finally realized you're not impressed by them anymore. That's what happens when you become the prize. People either elevate themselves or eliminate themselves. They adjust or they exit. They grow or they shrink. And what's poetic is that you don't have to force any of it. Your evolution does the sorting automatically. Your presence became a filter, a truth serum, a spotlight, a quiet recalibration that exposes who can stand in your orbit without collapsing under the weight of their own unaddressed insecurities. And here's the subtle chaos embedded in this stage. The more grounded you become, the more unstable their masks become. They slip, they crack, they glitch, because masks require constant performance. And your silence exposes how exhausting that performance really is. You being unignorable isn't about visibility, it's about undeniability. People can't deny your discipline, your clarity, your growth, your composure. They can't deny how different you feel, even if they can't articulate why. They can't deny how every interaction with you leaves them slightly more aware of their own fragmentation. That's why they take you seriously now. Not because they suddenly developed better taste in people, but because they now recognize that you hold yourself with a level of self-respect they must match if they want access. And the irony is delicious. The more seriously they take you, the less seriously you take their approval. That asymmetry is what cements your position. They're invested, you're selective, they're attentive, you're observant, they're hopeful, you're neutral. You've become the calm center of a circle. They're all trying not to get pushed out of. And that's the part they're terrified to admit, that somewhere along the line, the dynamic flipped, and now they're the ones performing emotional calculus just to maintain their position near you. They weigh their words, not because you demand perfection, but because your presence exposes laziness. They monitor their tone, not because you punish imperfection, but because your boundaries leave no room for carelessness. They analyze your reactions the way people analyze a weather pattern, trying to predict what version of themselves is safest to bring into your orbit. You didn't ask to be the standard. You became it by refusing to lower yourself to meet anyone's convenience. Your selectiveness has become a pressure system. They can feel the weight of it each time you fall silent. Each time you take your time before responding. Each time you choose not to give them the emotional shortcuts they once depended on. The world is used to people begging for attention, but you operate on a different circuitry entirely. You don't chase, you don't over-explain, you don't cling, you don't negotiate your worth. That level of internal sovereignty is rare, and rarity always commands a higher psychological price. You're not playing hard to get. You're simply hard to mishandle. That distinction carries a quiet brutality they can't ignore, because it forces them to confront a truth they've spent years avoiding. Access to you was always a privilege, never a default. You were generous, not desperate. You were patient, not passive. You were understanding, not unaware. And now that you've withdrawn the version of yourself who tolerated nonsense, they're scrambling to adapt to the version of you who doesn't make space for anything that disrupts your peace. Suddenly they're watching their own behavior through your eyes. Suddenly they're correcting themselves before you ever need to. Suddenly they're putting effort into things they used to skip, remembering details, honoring commitments, showing consistency, because they know your tolerance for carelessness is dead. You buried that version of yourself quietly, elegantly, and without ceremony. And even though they didn't attend the funeral, they feel the absence sharply. But the deeper shift, the one that tightens the psychological noose, is this: they're not improving to win you. They're improving to avoid being the reason they lose you. That's what happens when you become the prize. You stop being the one who adjusts. You stop being the one who compensates. You stop being the one who explains. You move through the world with a clean, silent expectation. Match the frequency or fall out of range. And what's fascinating is how instinctively they respond to that. Even the ones who once bragged about not needing anyone's approval now find themselves hungry for your acknowledgement. Even the ones who pretended they were too busy to notice you are suddenly hyper-aware of when you enter or exit a space. Even the ones who dismissed you now position themselves strategically, hoping proximity will make them relevant again. It doesn't. You've outgrown the era where proximity was a form of currency. You're not impressed by attention anymore. You're assessing intentions now. You're observing patterns. You're reading inconsistencies. You're prioritizing alignment over admiration. And that terrifies them, because admiration is easy. But alignment requires accountability. And accountability is the one thing people who underestimated you hoped they'd never owe you. But the world has reordered itself around your presence. Whether they like it or not, your growth has become a silent referendum on theirs. You've become the uncomfortable reminder of what they could have been if they didn't waste so much time performing confidence instead of building it. And in that shadow, they feel smaller, not because you diminish them, but because your evolution makes their stagnation louder. This is where the chaotic dark humor slides in, the twist they never saw coming. Once upon a time, they expected you to chase clarity. Now they're the ones chasing closure. Once, they expected you to justify your worth. Now they're the ones explaining their intentions. Once they believed you needed their acceptance. Now they're anxiously gauging whether they still qualify for yours. Your elevation turned the people who once treated you like background noise. into people who monitor your silence like a warning signal, and it hits them hardest at the moments they least expect. A conversation where you no longer soften your boundaries, a decision you make without asking for a vote, a room where you stand without shrinking, a glance that reveals nothing. Your neutrality is a psychological scalpel, precise, sharp, impossible to argue with. It cuts through pretense, it cuts through manipulation, it cuts through people who once relied on your emotional generosity to avoid confronting their flaws. That's why they take you seriously now, not out of admiration, but out of self-preservation. People fear misreading someone who can cut emotional ties without anger. People fear disappointing someone who doesn't hide the consequences in theatrics, but in distance. People fear losing someone whose absence now echoes louder than their presence ever used to. But here's the final shift, the one that locks everything into its new order. You don't simply evaluate people now. You curate them. You curate who gets to hear from you. You curate who gets access to your thoughts. You curate who gets the soft parts of your energy. You curate who gets the benefit of your insight. Your life has become intentional, not crowded, refined, not chaotic, selective, not reactive. And this curation, this deliberate filtering, creates an ecosystem where only those with genuine value can survive. You're not just unignorable anymore. You're untouchable to those who haven't done their own work. You're unreachable to those who still operate from entitlement. You're unshakable by people who once thrived off your uncertainty. They now treat you like the prize because your energy no longer leaks into places that dishonor it. You've become a rarity, someone who doesn't just know their worth, but protects it with quiet, unwavering consistency. And in a world where most people trade their integrity for attention, that makes you dangerous in the most elegant way possible.